Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice podcast, your inside connection to outdoor legislation. From the Beltway to policy happening your way, we're covering it all. I'm your host, Fred Bird. Join us as we explore public land access, wildlife and fisheries management, Second Amendment rights, the triumphs that shape our nation, the sports we all love, and the stories that fuel our passion for the great outdoors. This is the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast, the official podcast of the Congressional Sportsman's Foundation. This week, we're talking trap, and I'm so excited. I think you guys have heard me say this. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, chop it up about. I think we got about an hour and a half, about 90 minutes of sound here, and it goes like that. John Daniel from the National Trappers Association, Jason Wisniewski from Fur Takers of America. Both of them join us a couple months apart, but the information is still good. John sat down with us at NASC in Dewey Beach. Jason joins us in the here and now. We're going to cover some current issues going on, some bigger picture stuff with the trappers, and just really good information to pass along to your lawmakers. If you are a legislator and you're hearing this is going to be a great episode to educate yourself a bit. And if it inspires further thought, further engagement with CSF, with your sportsman's caucus at the state level, we are happy to engage and inform. You can get in touch with these two fellas and their organization as well to answer any questions. But all that said, like I said, it's a fast, quick 90 minutes. I think it was because it was a lot of fun recording it. So let's get into it. John and Jason, let's go. All right, our conversations continue here at the NASC Summit. We're joined by John Daniel, president of the National Trappers Association. Thanks so much for making some time and coming up to speak to us.
Glad to be here. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, this is a conversation I'm certainly looking forward to because as a passionate trapper and certainly don't get out there and run my lines as much as I used to, this is always fun to talk about for me. It's also an opportunity to educate. As you well know, trapping is probably one of the more maligned parts of our space, and always it seems like trappers take the butt end of a lot of stuff, especially when it comes to legislation that we see at the state level that comes across, and animal cruelty bills and some bills that directly attack best management practices that are on the ground with the gear we use and stuff that's already been vetted. So certainly it's in recent decades, probably the last 2 decades, as trappers have been under fire. It's not what it used to be, right? Speak to some of that and talk about, how this has evolved over probably the last 4 decades.
So, you're definitely right. We are the low-hanging fruit. So they're gonna go after us before they do the next step in line, when that's what it is. It's the next step in line. Mm-hmm. Trapping has evolved. I started trapping in 1977. Means and methods has definitely evolved. The best management practices and the BMP studies have done a lot to improve trapping methods, the humanity of it, and the education has come so far. When I started trapping in 1977, the education was pretty primitive on what you could get. It was more a lot of trial and error for the most part. If you didn't come from a family who was in it, I didn't, so I kind of had to learn things the hard way.
Yeah.
And in the last 20 years, especially, there's a lot more available out there. There's a lot more people willing to share their knowledge, and not only educate the trappers, but educate the general public on the need of trapping and what a valuable tool it is in overall wildlife management.
Which wasn't always the case, because when you had an actual market for fur, it was very competitive, and quite frankly, people didn't want to let their secrets out, especially, how they're trapping and, how they're so successful, right? Because they start eating to someone's bottom line. But the fur market, for all intents and purposes, is gone.
It is. It's, it has its highlights almost every year, mm-hmm. species or the other. Mm-hmm. But as a general rule, worldwide, it's not what it used to be.
No, we see fur bans. I was dealing with some legislation up in New England. Forgive me, I want to say it was Massachusetts here recently.
Just in the last few weeks.
Yes, we submitted testimony on, not obviously opposed to it, for sale. And what was even more so that was troubling about that was the import. So if I went online and bought a pair of beaver mittens from someone out in Idaho, now that sale could not happen. So it wasn't only impacting the residents and the trapping community of Massachusetts, but it was now affecting people outside of the state.
It is, and that's one of the things on these fur bans, which is one of the more recent ways that they're trying to shut down trapping. There's a lot of potential violation of interstate trade and commerce.
Mm-hmm.
We've looked into that quite extensive. We feel that that's a good defensive position and a valid point. In fact, we have some readiness summits coming up this year, starting in April, and one of the focuses of that those summits is the fact that these fur bans are in violation of interstate trade and commerce.
Who obviously CSF, we go to bat and we work these issues. I'm assuming you guys retain some people to work this stuff full time for you, so their support. And I mean, the trapping community is a small one. It's cash strapped, and resources are hard to come by.
It is. We have an office staff with 3 individuals, and we have our directors of national and international affairs team, the link arts that work for us, and of course our volunteer people throughout the country, which we primarily operate through volunteers. We have a very good attorney, Gary Lustico, and Gary's a trapper himself, and he bleeds it through and through, and he goes to bat for us and helps us do what we got to do on the legal realm of it. There's every state has their own special volunteers that help with it. It's just kind of a big concerted effort for the small group of people that trappers are, relatively speaking. We do a pretty good job there combating the anti-movements across the country. Right now, one of the biggest, in my opinion, one of the biggest things we have going against us is the weaponization of the ESA.
Mm-hmm.
It's been abused. It's been abused for several years. There's an ongoing problem with that, and if ESA is not reformed to somewhat, it's going to affect a lot of other things, not just trapping in the near future.
Well, as we were remarking here with a prior guest, the Turkey Federation, we brought that up. Some species end up getting put on that with the intention of never bringing them up. Most recently, I think in the last week or two, lower 48 wolverine was put on that.
Yeah, they actually put it on there last week. A good example of, that black hole that those things go down in is the grizzly bear. The grizzly bear is very much recovered.
Well, yes.
Surpassed the recovery goals by a long shot. But they actually used the grizzly bear in Montana just in the last few weeks to shorten the wolf season by 30 days, basically on a judge's whim, not on any kind of professional or scientific data there, but probably because somebody knew him well.
Yeah. It's a hard battle that's, been being fought for a while. And you said, earlier about education, and it as a community, I think we can do better. The pheasant hunter, the turkey hunter, the deer hunter, the bear hunter, because of these best management practices, because of the work that trappers do on the landscape, these are viable tools for wildlife management and have been proven out by agencies, by Fish and Wildlife. And like you said, they have tested all these for humane control. So if you do happen to trap a non-target species, you can release that species in a very humane way, only inconvenienced by being held in place for a little while. I don't know a state where you don't check your traps every 24 hours and every calendar day. So these things are maintained with the exception of under ice trapping, which, in my state is every 72 hours for beaver and otter and muskrat, things like that. But the stuff that's on terrestrial landscape, it's being checked every day.
There are some states that has some longer check laws, but, each state is a little different, especially the further west you get.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we have professional wildlife people,
Mm-hmm.
biologists and law enforcement people that can look at the data, research it, and determine what's best for that individual state and what works for them. You had mentioned there about easily released. There's a lot of success stories out there about trapping. One of the ones that comes to mind in my home state is otter were trapped in 1.5 coil spring traps and reintroduced to our state.
That's exactly right.
Have become fully recovered. And I'd mentioned our directors, national and international affairs, Link Arts. They trap otters to put in zoos so that the general public can view them and learn about them a little bit. And very successful, and they're using those foothold traps to do that with.
Mm-hmm.
The misconception that the trapping is a cruel, inhumane thing is just that. It's a misconception. The North American model, wildlife management, is the most successful model in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We're the envy of the world. Yes, in the 1800s, we did a lot of the use of our wildlife in this country. We didn't know any better. When I say we weren't alive then, but
Right.
our forefathers didn't know any better. But what we've seen starting in the early 1900s is a total better understanding and the value of good management practices, good wildlife management, and trapping has evolved right along with the rest of it. It certainly has, and it's one of the most beneficial and effective tools for managing predators. We have to manage predators, especially here in the northeastern region of the country where suburban sprawl has devastated habitat and the prey animals, and then the predators are condensed into smaller areas. And we've caused this problem as humans, and it's our responsibility to manage it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think people think that you can just put have heart traps on the landscape, you're going to solve all the problems. But that's just not the case, right? I mean,
No.
in some cases you can do that, like you said, for species reintroduction where needed. But you're not going to pick your species, trap them, and then relocate them and solve the problem. Now it's become someone else's problem.
Yeah, it definitely has. The raccoon population is probably the largest it's been in the history of North America.
Mm-hmm.
Along with that comes devastating diseases that goes along with it, parvo, distemper, rabies, and what have you. And part of that explosion problem is because fur prices went down and there wasn't a lot of incentive. Plus, our adversaries have made it a lot harder to manage them and use the traps over the years, and it's created issue. It's created issue in my home state. In Tennessee, in fact, Thursday, they're going to list the spotted skunk on the management list there in the state, and they've attributed it to disease and loss of habitat. And that disease is not coming from the skunks, but from the raccoons.
I'm afraid the similar situation may play out in the Northeast as it pertains to Fisher. They've also started succumbing to a strain of distemper. They're still working it out, as you probably well know. When I started trapping, we could take 10 total in the state, 5 in the south, and then the north part of the state, you could take another 5, and we're down to 2 statewide. And I'm afraid that before long, it's going to end up to a lottery, or they may just pause it altogether. And for me, selfishly, I love the Fisher. It's my favorite critter in the woods, and I think they get a bad rap, but they have their place and their value, and they do so much. And to have a species get lost because of disease or something like that, because we haven't managed other things, is devastating.
They are my dream animal. I've never caught a Fisher, but I've always wanted to. I went up to Pennsylvania a couple of years ago and struck out, but I intend to make another trip soon and have my chance to catch one. But, you hit on a very valid point. We have to manage all species. Protection of a species means just that. And protecting that species means managing the other species who can affect that species. And you need trapping to do that.
Yeah. I want to transition a little bit. Talk about the organization, National Trappers Association, the mission. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm certain you guys are chapter-based system. There's chapters in every state. Talk about the infrastructure and certainly how people can become involved.
So we do not have chapters. We have affiliates.
Okay, very good.
Affiliates are a little bit different. They are their own standalone state entities, and they affiliate with us. We are ran by our board of directors, which are voting representatives, state associations. Our primary function is the promotion and protection of trapping, and that's what we work very hard at doing. And in recent years, our other national organization, Fur Takers of America, and the National Trappers Association have worked very closely together and partnered on several things. I'm very happy for that new relationship we've built with them. We're all fighting for the same thing, and the more we can work together and use our resources in the same direction, the better off we'll be.
So you started, well, you had mentioned earlier about, low-hanging fruit, the trapping community. And I don't know if people hear this message, and I know amongst ourselves, we certainly kind of sing to the choir and say it, but understanding that when trapping is under attack and death by 1,000 cuts occurs, and they do, put lynx protection devices in place and make it harder to trap and manage other species using body gripping style conibear traps, because there may be a breeding pair of lynx somewhere within 500 miles radius. All of a sudden now the whole thing gets changed. So anyway, when you have some of these things go against the best management practices and the success rate of trappers, well, it is a stepping stone. So we get this and we start whacking away at all the trapping. What's next? It's the turkey. I don't like people shooting white-tailed deer. And here in Delaware, as we heard this morning, they got a deer issue here. For a very small state, they got a lot of dang deer. So it doesn't stop. Once the non-trapping, the anti-trapping community, or just the anti-hunting community at all, once they get their hooks in it, they're not letting go.
That's 100% right. And to think that we can manage any wild species without population control of those species is just unrealistic. And if we're gonna have to manage those species, of which we should manage those species, why should we not be able to take advantage of the bounty of it? I mean, some people feel like the humans should be removed from the natural things.
Yeah, there is that group.
And how can we do that? How can we create the problems by building our houses and our hotels and our roads and create these issues and not manage them? And if we're going to manage them, why should we not use them? Why should we not eat that venison steak? Why should we not wear that warm pelt?
Yeah,
it just makes good sense, and it's a responsible thing to do.
And so often the argument against our community is that, well, like you said earlier, it's inhumane, it's this, it's that. And, you do your best to try to hit people to, if not for us and the way we manage, the death of insert your species would be catastrophically inhumane.
Yeah,
and dying of thirst, starving, wasting away, just being bags of bones until they die an awful death. All the different diseases, and then they spread this and mange and, what's the burrowing scabies. I mean, these are horrible ways to die, freezing to death because your hair is falling off and that's just a terrible way to go.
It is, and everything is so linked, which is a way of design. Nature is supposed to be linked.
That's exactly right.
And if predators overtake their prey and they don't have anything to eat there, it affects them. It affects the other. They go into taking other things like domestic livestock or our pets and what have you, because they've expended their natural resource. And part of that is because of the way we have managed things or not managed things.
Right.
properly. Love the recovery of the wolf, love the recovery of other species, but those species that when they recover needs a management plan, a management plan that works. Trapping is one of those management plans. We're having a huge issue in the western states now, having to combat the antis who use the Endangered Species Act to benefit them, to basically shut down those management practices and those tools that that are needed to manage those species, and it's becoming a huge problem.
It used to be the theme was based on aesthetics, right? So your charismatic species, felines, bears, big fur bears that have this Disney-like effect on them. Now they just go for all of it, right? They don't care. When I was a commissioner in my home state of New Hampshire, we had a group of people that were working to end, if not end all, adjust the squirrel season, gray squirrels, based on their reproductive season and all this. And they were making these insane, crazy arguments around gray squirrels, which is a managed species in New Hampshire. But it's a well-populated and well-managed species. And so anyway, the point is they've gone from the aesthetically pleasing animals to all of them just as a means to shut it down. In Colorado, we're dealing with the cat issue. They're trying to get it all taken care of, the mountain lions, bobcats, and even in, if you don't know, in the lower 48, you can't touch lynx, but they're including them as well. They're already protected species.
Yeah, they are. And, that's the interesting thing about it. The lynx is not an endangered species.
Right.
Yeah. The term Canadian lynx is Canadian is on there for a reason. Most lynx live in Canada. The spillover and bleed over that comes down into our lower 48, that doesn't make them endangered. That just means that there's less of them. The wolverine, there was a study in 2013 that all the data is there. The experts say the wolverine is not really endangered. They are few and far between, but they always have been. That's the type of animal they are. They take a wide range. So to basically list the wolverine, because that's going to be a way to shut down the wolf trappings in the western states, is what it comes down to. That's what it's all about. It's about people who don't want to see the wolves managed. And if the wolves are not managed, Yellowstone is a prime example of what happens when those wolves are not managed. Look at the elk population, the moose population there in Yellowstone, and they're using the wolverine. Talked with a representative from the Idaho Snowmobile Association just a couple of weeks ago about that, and they conducted their own study a few years ago, and they're one day even shut down the snowmobile trails in those areas.
Is that right?
The wolverine habitat is, and what they're finding out through their studies is they're not invading the wolverine habitat so much as the wolverine figured out it's easy pickings around those snowmobile trails and what have you. So they're in that area, and the argument is, well, the snowmobiles are encroaching on their habitat, which is actually not the case. They're pulling them into that.
Interesting.
A little bit more, and we're going to be ramping up in the next several months, to work on hoping to call for a good reform in the ESA. The definition of take right now, if Canadian lynx, if you observe a Canadian lynx and that Canadian lynx sees you and that Canadian lynx leaves that area, you've taken that animal. And because of that, maybe you can't go hiking, maybe you can't go snowmobiling in an area where those are at. Idaho, we're in the middle of a lawsuit right now over grizzly bear habitat and the use of snares there in Idaho for wolf trapping, over those types of things. And the argument that you're endangering a whole species because one animal is affected is not really a true valid argument. We have to fix those problems. If we don't fix those problems, we're going to create bigger problems down the road.
Like people dying.
I mean,
I don't know what the percentage is, but grizzly bear, Greater Yellowstone grizzly bear attacks are for sure up.
Definitely. The next thing we may do is have to put the moose on the list because,
Uh,
I was talking with Justin Webb the other day about it, and the average wolf takes about 20 deer a year. So if you've got about 1,500 wolves, how many deer a year is that coming out of that herd population? So at what point do you let the management of the next species go to protect this species when that species is fully recovered? The need for that reform is imminent. It has to be done, not just for trappers, but for the animals that are being affected by it, by those prairie animals.
in the East, we look at, animals like coyote and bobcat, right? And devastating again on deer. And, you try to tell somebody that a tom large bobcat will take white-tailed deer, and they just, well, there's no way, it's just too small. And that we have documented cases, we have video, we have trail cam captures that this indeed does occur and has been occurring seemingly forever. Our eastern coyote is, it's a bigger, stronger pack mentality coyote that's different from its western cousin. The evolution of it, I mean, the skull size, the jaw structure has all been scientifically borne out that this is a different subspecies than what you're dealing with, little 30, 35-pound dog. And now we're getting into your lab-sized dogs. Again, in my state, New Hampshire, you can't trap bobcat. And getting back, so there's the point is getting back to the Wolverine reasoning, is people say, and they believe this, well, I don't see them, therefore they're endangered. Therefore they need to be protected. And I look at somebody and say, you don't see them by design. The spots, the coloring, they don't want us to be seen. They don't want to interact with human beings. That's the whole point. And now, every day, the news or their social media sites, oh, this cute bobcat was resting in so-and-so's back. This cute bobcat was, every day they're being seen in urban sprawl and in downtown city buildup. So now what? So now we try to come back to, okay, we agreed, okay, let's do a limited 50 tag lottery season for trapping. No, and that gets shut down because the aesthetic value. Now people, oh, we have so many beautiful bobcats, we can't. You're going to get to the point where these things are unmanageable. The fact that they're being seen every day and they're having these interactions in spots where they probably shouldn't is cause for alarm.
It is, and you had mentioned the coyotes there a minute ago. Just this past week, I was contacted by a fella. His son was deer hunting in Michigan and was attacked by a coyote there. And had he not had his gun with him, if it had been a hiker, not a deer hunter, the end could have been a little different than it turned out. He had to shoot the coyote for his own protection. The coyote charged him about 3 different times. He wasn't going to shoot it, and it persisted, and he had to defend himself. And we hear more and more of those types of stories.
Yes,
because they're losing their fear of man. Because our vice president was talking about in an interview here a while back about the grizzly bear. In Alaska, when you see a grizzly bear for the most time, he goes the other way because he knows that man can hurt it. Here in the lower 48, it's the other way around. We're actually becoming the prey.
Your food source.
In the last few, this past year in Montana, there was 5 grizzly bears killed by people in self-defense. 2 of those were trout fishermen. Had they not had a sidearm with them, they could have been that bear's next meal.
And conversely, you hate to see it because none of us want, in that situation, you don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to kill a bear. But, I mean, sorry, we're top of the food chain. Like, human being is more valuable than a grizzly bear, and people can't reconcile that, but you need to get to that headspace.
You had the turkey folks that here ahead of us doing an interview a few minutes ago, and the bobcats, the raccoons, the skunks, the possums, all of those things are huge predators on ground nesting birds.
Exactly right.
And with the explosion of the raccoon population across the country, quail are become almost non-existent.
Sure.
Wild quail. We have an obligation to protect those animals. Those birds. How do we do it? We put trappers out there. We give them an incentive to be there to manage them, not to eradicate, but to manage.
There you go. And that's an important point. Our keynote speaker this morning, Cuz Strickland, he's recently come into trapping for that very point, he's down there in Mississippi. Some of the Gulf states are very challenged with the decline of the wild turkey, trapping being the tool for management. So he started running, I believe, he started running dog proofs, and with his grandsons, and they, we know it's like Christmas morning every time you go out and check your traps. It's fun and done right. I mean, it's so rewarding. But he did notice on his properties where he was trapping during season, that when he was taking out managing these populations, his turkey numbers in a couple seasons started rebounding. And they had documented proof of it.
Sure, and you can find story after story of that by private landowners and by DNRs as well. It's there. The data's there. The proof is there. A healthy ecosystem, a healthy wildlife habitat is a managed one, and you manage all aspects.
Yeah, exactly right. Where can people go to find more information about the National Trappers Association? How can they get involved with the affiliates throughout their states and maybe learn a thing or two to take up trapping?
So Google trapping in your home state, and you should find the state associations there. You can go on the National Trappers Association website. We have 2 different Facebook pages. We have NTA Talk and the National Trappers Association Facebook page as well. We encourage you to become a member, even if you're not a trapper, if you're a deer hunter, a turkey hunter, or whatever. Like I said a few minutes ago, we're the low-hanging fruit. When we're gone, you're next in line.
That's exactly right.
Help support us. We're going to support you and help support us.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for, partnership, working together. I know I certainly have a vested interest when I see some of the bad legislation getting put together. And again, personal bias aside, it is an opportunity to advocate and educate and let legislators know, if you do remove this, here's the ripple effect down the line, and it starts affecting the things you care about.
It's a pleasure being here, and it's a pleasure having an opportunity to talk with you, and seeing all the different groups come together here and seeing what you guys do. It's very inspiring and gives hope for the future. Thank you for all you guys do.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the summit.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate y'all reaching out. There's lots of podcasts going on right now. Seems like every week somebody's calling.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a saturated market, to be sure, but I mean, I guess that means the messaging and the storytelling is getting out there, so that's the important.
Must be effective, otherwise nobody would be doing it.
That's right. Well, let's jump into it. We welcome in to the Sportsman's Voice podcast, Jason Wisniewski, the president of Fur Takers of America. We met down at NASC and Dewey Beach. We had John Daniel on from North. I keep wanting to say that National Trappers Association. Had a nice conversation with him. Missed you down there, so I wanted to make sure we had the opportunity to bring you on here and get Fur Takers of America's take on the status of trapping in the lower 48 and in Canada, and what's going on in North America, trends that we're seeing, and kind of build off of our conversation that we had back in December at NASC. And how are things with you? How are things with the organization?
Well, everything seems to be going pretty smooth. Overall, it's been a nice light legislative session so far for trapping. There are a number of bills out there I've seen that have something to do, but most of them haven't been negative until about the last 2 weeks. We've started seeing a few things pop up. There's been actually, I was just told about a new fur ban bill in Rhode Island. It was just introduced. I think they're having a hearing on it tomorrow, so I need to submit some comments on that. And that seems to be one of the flavors of the week, we'll say, from the legislative standpoint. Almost every state's been having one lately. And, and it's a lot of what I would call fear mongering, a lot of the issues with the transfer of COVID from mink to humans, and kind of using that as one of the mainstay arguments on that. And unfortunately, there's really been a lot of research lately that's shown that I think in the U.S. there's only been about 4 cases documented of COVID going from mink to people, and I think that's mostly been in 2021, so it's a few years away. CDC has great guidance on it. Last week, there was a hearing on trying to ban mink farms in Illinois as well, so that was a whole nother one. And, and that's mink farming. That's a little bit maybe outside of the wild fur industry that trapping and fur harvesters are part of, but it still plays into the global market, because if there's less demand for fur, then that's going to be less demand for the wild fur, which is really the only incentive that a lot of trappers and sportsmen have to go out and provide a service of controlling these species that wouldn't otherwise be controlled, or their populations wouldn't be controlled. And, whenever you start adding up all your trapping gear and how much it costs, it can get pretty expensive. A lot of people consider it a hobby, but, really when it comes down to it, we're all a part of conservation and wildlife management in harvesting these animals. And we certainly see that more and more as raccoon populations are almost, I think, at record highs, even pre-European colonization. I think, your coyotes have exploded everywhere, all through the East, especially here in the Southeast. It wasn't until about 30 years ago that we had them. So as those numbers have gone up, it's really had some impacts on other species, including, our game species, but as well as our non-game species,
That's
which
right.
is something that we're all concerned about. And, we have to manage the ecosystem collectively, and harvest is a way that we keep those animals from getting too high and causing too many problems, especially with the human-wildlife interactions and conflicts.
We dealt with those fur bans that you mentioned last session. You mentioned Rhode Island. That's the area I look at, so I was aware of that. And really, it's like copy and paste all across the country where these bills are popping up. Someone sharing the same thing, the same language, because they literally are like the same bill, just different numbers in different states. So I guess we're ready to respond, since we've already done it a couple times, and engaging enthusiastically. So, and John and I talked about this in December. What's problematic about that, aside from, restricting it in the state where the legislation is born, is a lot of these bills are stopping the import. So if me sitting in here in New Hampshire, and if you have a product that you've created out of fur you've trapped, and I wouldn't be able to buy it from you if that legislation passed. So it's not just affecting here at home, it's affecting people down across the country. And really there's an economic issue to that as well. I mean, as there's so many folks sharing their story online, it's very encouraging to see. There's a couple that stand out. There's DeBow up here in my area. He's been doing a great job as of late. New England Naturals, I think. You guys have been sharing this stuff. He and his wife have a great shop making some great products, natural, organic products. There's a fella up in, I think, Alaska that's been really sharing his story and fur handling and going through that process and making beautiful items, mittens, hats, blankets, things like that. Wouldn't be able to go to the marketplace and purchase these things if that legislation passed in Rhode Island. And that's, I'm not a lawyer, but I got to think that, interstate commerce clauses come into play here. You shouldn't be able to dictate what, if I'm a Rhode Island resident, what I buy from a guy in Alaska. It seems to be a stretch too far, and certainly worthy of action.
Yeah, and one of the we'll say collateral damage on something like that, and it was something that I was really happy to see just a few weeks ago. The state of Washington also introduced the same bill. It's a cookie cutter bill, just like you said. It's almost the same language in every state that it's been introduced in. A lot of municipalities are having this now as well. But in Washington, they had actually introduced this bill, and it was actually one of the big benefits of the Fur Takers of America and the National Trappers Association going to the NASC Summit over the last few years. It was the connections we made there with some folks, especially the American Sportfish Association. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, you have this fur ban. It doesn't specifically say anything about fishing lures, fly tackle, fly tying materials, but that's a lot of fur. And So I had actually reached out to Connor Bevan. I saw him at the AFL meeting this past fall from Connor Bevan's with the American Sport Fish Association. And I asked him if they were tracking any of this, and he really wasn't aware. And he asked if I could send a few of these bills to him, and they took a look at it. And sure enough, one of the biggest issues that really stopped it in Washington State was the fact that it didn't have any sort of exemptions for fishing tackle.
Right.
How was that going to affect the whole fishing industry? And, there's so much fur in items that most people aren't aware of. Your 10X beaver hats, felt hats, those, if you're getting the high grade ones, those are all wild fur, a lot of beaver in there, chinchilla, some other critters. But certainly the beaver is the big hot button issue right now. The price of beaver felt right now is really high because of the demand for Western hats, a large part due to the following of the TV show Yellowstone. Everybody wants to be a cowboy now. Everybody wants to have a nice hat. We also think of some other cultures, specifically what we hear from some of the big fur brokers is the Jewish community really appreciates good quality hats, and they want them to where they can pass down from generation to generation. And you just don't get that with synthetic materials. So, all their hats, and then the European market apparently is really hot right now as well, where a lot of folks in Europe want good quality felt hats, whether it be top hats, derbies, just any kind of hat. And that's where the real beaver market started in North America back in the 1700s, I guess, when we were first colonizing it. All those beavers were being sent back for the hat market in Europe. And, so there's anything to do with fur is global. It's not just in your state. It's not just in our country, but it certainly supports the global market. And there's a lot of climates where synthetic materials great, but it's no comparison to fur. So you get up into Russia and up in the Scandinavian countries, well, that fur will keep you a heck of a lot warmer than all this synthetic.
So two things off of that line of thought, right? So first, I got to chuckle and laugh at the irony of the European market wanting fur product, right? Their wildlife management is just bonkers compared to what we got going on as the envy of the entire planet, where they could have righted some wrongs and still haven't. So I guess to our benefit, to the North American fur trapper, yay for us. There's a market there. So the last part you said there was the synthetic fur, which so many people are worried about their carbon footprint and being eco-friendly. Well, this all needs to be made from something, right? It's not just made out of thin air and a high petroleum product with probably a decent carbon footprint that's in large part worthless. Like you said, when you start getting these environments where you really are benefiting from having natural fur product.
Well, and the other thing with the you talked about the carbon footprint and all, and all these synthetic materials are made from some sort of plastics, usually petroleum based. Throughout the world now, I've seen some stuff from the National Institute of Health that suggests that somewhere around 83% of all waters in the world have microplastics in now, from all these microfibers. I'm an aquatic biologist by training, and that's what I do, I guess, is my day job. And, dealing with endangered species of all things, which is kind of ironic, but, fish, it's amazing how many fish have microplastics in them. A lot of wildlife do. And it's all because of, as we transition away from more natural stuff, well, that has to come from somewhere. And petroleum-based products are the most, I guess, simple to create. And, we have a lot of access to petroleum worldwide. We know how we depend on that. And, as we have more of that out there, more of it gets thrown into the landfills, and granted, there is probably some synthetic materials in a fur jacket you have made, but obviously it's going to be less than if it's all synthetic material. So, we try to do our best at, having zero footprint if possible, but we know that we have to live in the world we're in, not the one we wish we were in. So, reduce and reuse the best we can. So, that's what we're trying to do. And that's what the wild fur, or all fur really, does, is it creates that renewable natural resource that, can go out there, and it's very effective. And obviously, I always go back to, the world was made perfect. It wasn't until man got here that we started screwing it up. And all that fur is the insulator for all the animals, including humans. We have hair on ourselves to keep us warm, and that's really important and effective.
So there's something to be said there. You want to take it down a rabbit hole, if you will, with the acknowledgement. And I think on our last program, this was a line of thought. There's 8 billion people on this. You're never going to go back to the time when it was a low human density. There was plenty of contiguous acres, plenty of places for man and beast to spread out. It's just never going to happen. So in the preservationist mindset, the people that would like to see Fur Takers of America go away, National Trappers Association go away, and outlaw all trapping and fur bans at all, what happens? The last program we kept coming to, what I kept asking was, well, what now? You get your way, what now? What happens when the wildlife managers on the ground go away? And to answer some of that, and I'll let you jump in here after, is the biggest point with trappers is we pay to provide a great service. We go out and buy a license. We buy our own equipment. We go out there willingly and enthusiastically to go on the landscape and participate in the trapping hobby or process. Most governments and municipalities are not paying a licensed contractor to come out and do beaver mitigation or whatever the issue may be, which can be many thousands of dollars. More to a point, Fish and Game agencies could not hire enough people to gather the integral biological data we provide on the landscape. Case in point, here in New Hampshire, we have a problem with our fisher population. You're well aware. The active licensed trappers have provided carcasses, initially started providing jawbones, so they could identify and try to figure out what was going on with this strain of distemper and why our fisher population was taking a hit and the ramifications of that. So all that to say, we provide one hell of a service on the ground. What are the antis of the people that would like to see us go away going to do about it? How are they going to help? And please fill in the rest.
That's a great question. That has to come from somewhere. We already know nationwide that conservation funding isn't enough for managing the stuff that's almost going extinct. We can only put money towards so many things. Then you start tacking on the fur bearers, which, a lot of people aren't aware that if it wasn't for fur harvest, we really wouldn't have any idea of how many of these animals are on the landscape. The harvest reports that trappers send in each year that come from the fur cells that are all regulated by the states and tracked by that. That's where all this harvest information comes from. And not a whole lot of that money goes back to fur bear management, largely because there's a finite amount of funding for wildlife management. And, when we have, I don't know if I think it's somewhere around 14 million hunters across the U.S. Well, those game species are going to take precedence no matter what. The other thing is we don't have to worry about overharvest on most of our fur bearers. If anything, we probably have to worry more about underharvest, and that's exactly what you were saying about whenever we have no harvest of these animals. And I think one of the best cases to point to right now is probably the raccoon populations. They're just exploding everywhere. The raccoon fur market has been awful for pretty much as long as I can remember. It's nothing like it was whenever I was a little kid, and they were actually worth going after, and you could actually make some money on. But if there's no monetary incentive for somebody to go out there and spend, we'll say, just on our farm where I do a lot of my trapping, I'll go out on a side-by-side, and probably every 2 days I need to fill the tank with gas, and it's probably about 5 or 6 gallons. Well, $3 a gallon, that's $18 every 2 days that I'm spending just for the privilege to go out and trap these animals and manage their populations. You factor in the gear, and it's an expensive service to provide. And like you said, we're buying the licenses as well. And we don't get any sort of revenue other than what we can get out of the pelts at the end of the year, which that even changes a lot by where you are geographically. In the Southeast, where I'm at, most of our stuff is a lot less valuable. The fur quality is not as great, so there's not as much use for it compared to something, from out in the Midwest or the Northeast or any of the other parts of the country. So a lot of the stuff we're doing here, and we definitely see it. A couple years ago, we had a big case of mange run through our farm, and I think of all my coyotes, about half of them had mange.
Wow.
And you think that was probably in January, early February when I was trapping them. That was kind of, through a good bit of the winter, but how harsh that would be without any fur.
Well,
The itching they have to go through. You see the big cases of canine distemper going on everywhere now, to the extent that they believe it's affecting the eastern spotted skunk, which is a species of greatest conservation need.
Yep.
That's really disturbing that, an overpopulation of one of these species that we're going after is having an effect on a species that may need to be listed. So we live in a world where everything's connected, and that's one of the things that, as a wildlife biologist for many years, we always said about you have to know the connection. And I don't think a lot of people have that appreciation or really think about it very often.
Well, they're so far removed from it too. I mean, look at this. Just anybody, Joe Schmo, that probably lives next door to you. And they'll admit, I don't want to be a part of the process. I can't think about it. I can't bring myself to think about an animal dying, being killed, slaughtered, so I can have some smash burgers or some hot dogs, right? Even on that level. So never mind, the take of a whitetail or a wild turkey. So they are completely removed from that surface level of it. Never mind go 2-3 deep that we're talking about, or even deeper on the interconnected web of all these animals and how they're all working on the landscape and affecting one another. And back to what I was saying about 8 billion people on the rock, you'll never get to a spot, because what the antis like to do is say they'll self-control, they'll self-regulate, maybe for a bit, but eventually the system will get out of whack because they just don't have the space, they don't have the resources, and neither do we, quite frankly, for it to find that perfect balance that may have happened 2,000 plus years ago. It just doesn't exist. And then back to what you were saying here, and our concern with, the example of your coyote and coyote population getting mange and distemper and going through, in the South, probably a mild winter compared to what we have up here in the Northeast. But this part of the story is never told except for in our own echo chamber. We care. We do not like walking up on a set, finding a struggling, mangy animal, coyote in this example, that's torturous, that hurts us. We care about these animals. That's part of the reason we're out there providing the service. And that the anti-crowd likes to, malign us as torturers, spawns of the devil, what have you. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, and that's, you mentioned self-regulation, and that mange and the distemper and all the problems they cause, that's all a part of that self-regulation. People aren't really aware of it or think of it that way, but in the grand scheme, that's what happens when you exceed carrying capacity, and something has got to bring it down to carrying capacity. The ceiling just doesn't last forever. You either have a lack of food resources, you have disease come in, and I always use the term with trapping or any harvest really for that matter, is that's the way that agencies and wildlife managers social distance wildlife. We come out of the COVID era and then, social distancing was a huge buzzword, and that was there so we don't spread the disease as rapidly. And that's exactly what we do when we harvest these animals. We lower their population to keep them around carrying capacity. And, when they get above that, that's whenever they start to self-regulate, and self-regulation isn't pretty.
No.
When it comes down to it, it's far, far longer lasting and agonizing for an animal than just simply going up and shooting it or harvesting it through any of our traditional methods. So that's one of those things, like you said, everybody's so far removed from thinking about, but that wildlife disease is just absolutely, it's horrifying when you walk up on it. I mean, I hate to see any animal suffer, no matter what it is. That's, a lot of people will say that about trapping. Well, you're so cruel, you just want to make animals suffer. And it's like, well, no, it's actually the total opposite. I don't want these animals to suffer. And that's exactly why we do it. And that's why, I do it for pretty much, I don't even sell my fur. I tan it myself, use some of it for different things, but I have no interest in selling any of it anymore. If I could, I don't know if it would even sell, but it's all for the wildlife management aspect of it that I do on our farm and some of the areas around. So, of course, the benefits of that is you start seeing more game species. You start seeing some stuff that you might not seen as often prior to really getting in and doing a lot of trapping here. This is my wife's family farm, so I kind of moved in about 8 or 9 years ago, I guess, as we got married and started coming down here trapping. And we were very fortunate to where we got to move down this past year and live on the premises. But
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
It's really amazing to see the transformation over the last 5 or 6 years. Hardly any coyotes on the property, very little sign of them. There's some, you're never going to get rid of them all, and that's not what we're trying to do anyway, but we're trying to regulate those populations. The cool side effect of that is our turkey numbers have been increasing like crazy. We we have so many deer that we need to let the coyotes eat a few. I don't mind that. And, but the quail population, we're starting to hear more and more bobwhite.
It's fantastic.
And then as a hunter, something that my brother-in-law really noticed. I didn't notice so much, but in the spring and turkey season, he said the toms were much more vocal than they'd ever been once I started trapping coyote. And I have a theory that basically those coyotes hear that and they know exactly where to key in on and they go right to it. And I've been stalked by coyotes I don't know how many times while I've been turkey hunting. And we actually had one chase a nice tom in a couple years ago. I was out with a couple first time hunters and we were sitting there and this tom just came running in and flew up in this big oak tree. It was really, really interesting to watch. I didn't know what the heck was going on, but sure enough, that coyote went and circled that oak tree just like a coon dog, looking up there. And then he walked off. And I'll be danged if I didn't walk up over the hill going out the back side of the property just to see where it went. And that coyote was tracking all of those turkeys. There was a bunch of hens there too. And he was just staying far enough behind them so he could be within sight. And, and I wonder how much of that's leading to a lot of the declines people were seeing, from nest predation and stuff across the country with turkeys. So,
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
100%. It's definitely one of the top variables, right, that we can control. Now, Cuz Strickland, who was at NASC, you probably met him, and he has worked with Alan Probst in the past and done a really good job managing their property down in Mississippi and seen immediate effects within a couple seasons, taking his grandkids out and just running coon cuffs. And same thing, especially with turkey, managing for those turkey populations, seeing great effects on the ground. So, that's one of the things we can definitely control when you're specifically talking about turkeys. I mean, weather, avian predation, we got no control over that. It is what it is. But, your skunks, your possums, your raccoons especially, I mean, if you could put out a little bit of work, you could probably improve at least your own piece of ground if you have enough to make a difference. But I wanted to touch on, what you said there about, how scrutinized we are and as trappers, and then, the outside looking in saying that we torture, and that couldn't be anything further from the truth. And wanted to segue into best management practices. You talked about earlier at the beginning of the conversation about trappers having to submit their annual reports, and those are pretty detailed reports going from trap night efforts, how long you had a trap set out, how many days you trapped, and many states you got to check your traps every single day. All of this information is annotated and then brought in. And then furthermore, the traps we set on the ground, you just can't go out and set, what you probably see on old Bugs Bunny, steel, jagged jaws and stuff. That stuff doesn't exist. And if it does, it's in a museum. Like you can't, our trapping, our modern day trapping is so regulated and so scientifically analyzed to the benefit of the animal that we're just causing a minor inconvenience literally in its day, because where you have to check your traps every 24 hours, a critter is not sitting in that trap longer than 24.
No, absolutely not. Most of them being nocturnal, they're going to be in there sometime well after you set. I usually try to get out at 5 a.m. and start setting, and chances are those animals were probably caught at 2 a.m. the next day. So really, by the time I get back around, it's only a couple hours at most. And most of the time, I actually did some stuff a few years ago. I have a drone, and kind of one of my little, I don't know if I'd call it a hobby or a side business I'm getting into is drone photography and stuff. And so I figured, well, I'll go out and see if there's anything in these traps over the hill before I get to actually go up and disturb them, because we all know when you start getting up there, they start reacting and jumping around. You do that with a drone, and you see that most of them are still asleep sitting there.
Right.
Just laying there. They're not reacting. They know that, basically it's just like handcuffs. It's just a restraining device. And there's been a lot of research that has gone into all these. One is, by nature, trappers are tinkers. They, I think that's one thing that we all go in. We like to improve our own stuff, look at it, try to make it the most efficient. And, everything from center swiveling so you don't get chains bound up. That was something I had done on all my traps 20 years ago. And most of them come stock like that, except for a few individual traps. But they had the center swiveling, multiple swivels on there so the chains don't get bound up as well. The wide face jaws, which are, on almost all the newer traps are coming out with laminated jaws that basically it just increased the surface area of those jaws. Same holding pressure, it's just less pounds per square inch, I guess, on that area where it's holding. So it holds across the foot better, gets a better grip on it all. So, very selective. You can adjust your poundage on these to where, if I'm out coyote trapping, for instance, I like to run a good solid 4 pounds of pan tension, which for the listeners that aren't familiar, that's just how much weight it's going to take for that trap to go off. And so when that coyote comes up there and he steps in it, it's going to go off. If a rabbit comes in there, it's not going to set it off. As a matter of fact, I've really kind of excluded catching any possums and skunks simply by increasing my pan tension, because most of them aren't getting, especially in the South, we don't get many possums or skunks that are, 4+ pounds, that or at least put 4+ pounds in one spot to step on that trap. So they're very selective from that aspect. And the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies has done an outstanding job with the Fur Bear Conservation Technical Working Group, which is a kind of a conglomerate of a number of the fur bear biologists from around the country that get together, have like a panel or a team that works on this stuff, and they decide which traps they're going to test based on pretty much which ones are the most popularly used by trappers across the country. They go out and then give them to a number of trappers to test out, and then they actually take the animals that are caught back to pathologists and veterinarians who look at them, assess the damages, give them scores on that, give them scores on the effectiveness of targeting specific animals, and then, a whole slew of metrics that they go through. And all of that's available on the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Technical Working Groups. I think it's the Fur Bear Management website, but they have the results of all those tests, all the different traps they've tested, and it's really an outstanding resource for anybody that's interested in learning more about that process. But it's scientifically based. They actually send traps off to Canada to a mechanical testing lab to make sure that these traps are, good materials. They're something that have enough forced to keep toe catches and stuff like that from happening, and all the other stuff that you worry about. But in general, as a trapper, when I go up to my trap, if something stepped in it, I want it to be there the next morning. That's the whole purpose of going out. So I want to make sure I'm using the most efficient gear possible. We always hear, one of the big rumors, I guess, that antis use a lot is, well, they chew off their own feet. And, and it's like, no, that really doesn't happen. I mean, why would you? I mean, it doesn't happen much with people. You hear the occasional case of somebody having a tree fall on them and a guy will cut his leg off. But, it's probably been 2 times in my 40 some years of living that I've heard. But, these animals are just usually in those traps. Usually there's very little damage whatsoever, maybe a little bit of swelling on their feet, but, where they're, and what's so misleading is you see the examples where people set a trap and they put a pencil in there and it snaps and pieces go flying everywhere. It looks really, really intimidating, very dangerous. And then, there's a lot of videos out there of people putting their hands in traps. And I had done one several years ago with the agency I was working with. It's on YouTube, and did that kind of as the final part. And I mean, it's just, our hands have meat on them. You hardly feel it. The biggest thing is having to bend down and use your feet to get the trap off your hand. And, and then you think of most of our wild animals that we're catching, our fur bearers, they have big meaty feet because they walk around on them without shoes on all day long. So it's really just grabbing that meaty portion of their foot and, just kind of, it's all cushioned. And, some places they've implemented cushion jaws, which I think a lot of them have gone away from now. I know in Tennessee they did. A few years ago, they said, okay, we just want wider surface jaws because the research showed that was more effective than the cushion rubber jawed traps. I was just going to say the research is really driving what's being done by the different states, as well as, what trappers are using. I mean, they're going to use the best equipment they can afford when it comes down to it. Sure, you're always going to have somebody that's out there using their granddaddy's trap from whenever to catch muskrats or whatever. But, if I'm after a coyote, it's hard enough to catch one. The first thing is making sure you're using good gear.
You think about the challenge of that, right? And I know amongst ourselves and trapping, we always kind of bring this up. It's kind of cliche. Well, not cliche. It's just a very common thing to say. The specificity and literally the art that goes into a trap set, of all the places an animal can put its foot on the landscape. And we are so dialed in and so almost perfect about it that when we do get an animal, our target species, in a trap set, that's a pretty remarkable thing. And it is very purposeful, and it's not an accident. It's not some blind set that's just out there. I hope I get something. It is very, very purposeful. You talk about pan tension and not catching, something that you don't want to have in that trap. If you're targeting coyotes, 4 pounds or more, whatever is going to set that pan off for that land set, right? And then, the traps are set up to release any incidental catches, but we don't want incidental catches. That's one, it's a nuisance because it takes time to put these sets together. So you want your target species in there for a reason. And then if you catch something that's out of season, like I've done up here in New Hampshire and took a lot of the passion out of it, is bobcats. We've had such an explosion of bobcats, and because they've become such a political tinderbox, the agency, politicians, no one will touch bobcats just because it freaks everybody out. We have too many cats. And I didn't want to release them anymore. So I kind of started getting away from some of the land I was managing for landowners and kind of just went straight to water sets, because I was like, well, cat's not going to come down here to my beaver set. At least they didn't. I'm not saying that's guaranteed. Chances are almost 100% they would not. So, there's an issue there. And I could go on this soapbox for a long time. The biggest point is, modern day trapper, with everything, all the information we have, all the science, all the ridicule, all the self-ridicule that we go through, is so that we can go out there on the landscape and do things very purposefully, become successful, become efficient at it, and then move on with our day. Because it is a laborious effort.
Yeah, you often hear from, I guess, anti-trappers saying, well, it's just a coward's way or a lazy man's way of hunting. And it's like, and it was actually neat. I was on a legislative hearing last year. It was in Montana, and happened that the chair, he was up there, talking, leading the whole thing, moderating. And one of the people came on and said, while trapping is just a cowardly way and a lazy man's way of doing this. The chair stopped him right on the spot, says, I've been a 6th generation cattle farmer. We implement trapping, and I do it myself on our ranch. And, I will say that there is nothing lazy about trapping. He said it's, and anybody that really wants to find out, I really encourage them to go out. And that's why you see a lot of people, my brother-in-law, I know he would love to do it, but he doesn't have the patience or the gumption to go out there and, wake up at 5 a.m. and get out of the woods at dark and, and set all day long. And then, once you set, it's not bad going around, and unless you're catching a lot of stuff, and then that can be time consuming.
Sure,
You're having to remix
process that fur.
Then you got to process the fur. Yeah, we all know that a lot of the work happens after you make the catch or after you harvest the animal. So it is a ton of work, and I mean that's why a lot of ranchers, a lot of hunting clubs everywhere, they'll pay trappers to come in and do this service because, one is they don't have the expertise to do it. 2 is they don't have the time or the equipment, and and it is a somewhat of an art. I think a lot of it's just a skill set that you develop over time, just like we do when we go out hunting or fishing. We learn, okay, this is what we have to do to catch this or hunt this, and excuse me, and and that's what I always encourage a lot of hunters. If you aren't a trapper, start trapping, because you're going to learn animal movements and you're going to understand how to become a better hunter more than you ever would hunting every day. Especially bow hunting. I always use it for that because, you have to be close. And and with trapping, the reason we can go and catch that animal and make that little pad step on a 2x2 inch, piece of metal that's in a 40-acre field is because we know exactly where those animals are going to move. We use a little bit of lure to, just get them to make that final commitment. Maybe the next 2 inches or 6 inches they have to move. Usually you're not going to move them much further than that unless there's some young animals that aren't as neophobic or anything. But yeah, certainly if you're just hunting and you've never trapped, certainly go out and try it, because you will definitely increase your game for hunting, and just you'll understand a lot of stuff on a deeper, I think a deeper level than you had previously ever thought about it.
I've been trapping now for almost 20 years here in New Hampshire, and hunting for over 20 years. And when you're exactly right, as soon as I started trapping, and more specifically, my water sets in those riparian areas, targeting mink and otter and beaver, I learned more about deer activity, deer habits than I ever would have read or watched on TV. I never would have picked it up. I would have never started connecting dots and looking at the landscape in a totally different way. I learned more about where to set my stand or where to kind of target. Same thing with turkey. I started finding all this turkey sign because the turkey were roosting up on those river systems. That's where they like to be, before I really got educated about my true passion, that is turkey hunting. And I'll say, holy smokes, the turkeys are all right here. It was just so illuminating. Anyway, you're exactly right. And anybody that has the ability to get out on the landscape with a trapper, most of them will gladly take you just to show you. And to that point, with this podcast, and we're here as a resource for our legislators across the country. I hope some of you are able to hear this and are tuned in on this, and will share this program, this specific one, with your fellow legislators, because as these problematic pieces of policy come up, a lot of the answers are within. We're going about 45 minutes. John talked for about 30 minutes on the front end of this back at NASC. This one program has a lot of great information in it and is easily digestible on a drive up to the state capitol or to your committee meeting. And I would encourage you to listen to it again, and then pass it along. I'm always available by contact. Jason is available by contact at Fur Takers. National Trappers Association would be more than happy to answer questions, especially coming from our lawmakers.
And I'll throw in there too, almost every state has their state trapping association, and those folks are the ones that are most knowledgeable on what goes on within that jurisdictional boundary. And for all those legislators and decision makers that may be listening, certainly go to your, trappers associations. Almost everyone has one online. Can go on there, find out who to contact. If you ever have any questions, definitely reach out, because what we do know is, based on some surveys that have been done recently, most of the American public don't have a clue that trapping even still exists. So why should we expect any of you listeners to really have a whole big comprehension of all the different facets and things that come up in this legislation? So certainly use us as the resource. A lot of us, whenever we have to answer a question, we go to Google. We try to find the answer wherever. And certainly, the Fur Takers of America, the National Trappers, and the state trapping associations are great resources for anything you might have questions on.
FurTakersOfAmerica.com. You can go there. Lots of resources there. You guys are a membership-based organization, so certainly if you're able to, throw a few bucks in and get your membership. Skin in the game is important. It's not enough to just buy your hunting, fishing license and call yourself a conservationist. I truly believe you need to go a step further and at least be involved in one or two conservation organizations, and especially the trapping organizations could use your financial help and your commitment. Trappers are the keystone conservationists. I don't know if I'm the first person to say that, but I definitely feel like I coined that term back in 2017 when I started doing this podcast and thing. And we are the keystone conservationists. And if trappers go away and are maligned to the point where they start becoming outlawed in the practices that we provide even for free on the landscape, go away, all the rest of it starts, the dominoes start falling all the way. And where you think you could never lose deer hunting, by golly, you're going to lose deer hunting.
Yeah, we've definitely seen it in Colorado right now with the, I guess, quote unquote, it was a trophy bill, but it was really aiming towards the cats. And, that's just the next low hanging fruit. We always say trapping's a low hanging fruit. Yep. They outlawed a lot of the trapping out there several years back. And now it's just, the next domino in the chain. And
a moment on that, if you will, because our team is engaged on that in the West. That bill, on the face of it, is irritating to me because of a technicality. But again, this is something the population doesn't think about, the 80% in the middle. They specifically said, you call it the cat bill, no hunting and trapping of bobcat, mountain lion, and lynx. Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot take lynx anywhere in the lower 48. That's not a thing. So to put that on there as a scare tactic or some sort of propaganda, and that's exactly what it is. You can't take them anyway. We have so many lynx exclusionary zones in the Northeast, in the Rockies, and the Northwest, where we are on the lower range of the Canadian lynx. Canadian lynx are fine. They're doing great north of the border. Likewise with the wolverine. We just happen to be the lower area of their range. That doesn't mean they're extinct. That doesn't mean they're destined for the ESA. It's just we're on the lower range of it. So it chasts my backside so much that they put that lynx on there as a marketing campaign. That's what it is.
It's disingenuous. And, something interesting on the lynx, and you may have seen the science a few years ago. There's a paper published in I think it was the Journal of Wildlife Management, but, they had recorded a bunch of lynx. I guess they'd done radio telemetry on them in Maine, and they found that one of the leading causes of mortality was from fishers.
Yes, that's
and it's
right.
Like, hey, here's a one fur bearer that's affecting a federally endangered one that, probably, the Fish and Wildlife Service was supposed to delist it 2 years ago. It was supposed to be delisted all across its range because it met major recovery objectives, and unfortunately, legal biology got caught up in there, I guess, or not legislation, but it was a lawsuit, and unfortunately, a species that was deemed by the leading experts to have been recovered is still listed.
Yeah,
which
many.
It's just really a shame, because that's also a black eye for the Endangered Species Act.
That's right.
Well, how are we ever going to delist anything if that's going to happen?
Yeah, that's definitely problematic. And there's species that should be there, and that act should be used for his intention, but it was never meant to be put him on there in perpetuity and just put him in a glass ball and observe them. That's Greater Yellowstone grizzly, a perfect example. Sweet irony of that Maine issue is that Maine was, in the last 10 years, forced Maine trappers, marten and fisher trappers, to put that crazy 90-degree link exclusion device on there so that you weren't catching lynx, but it also made it way harder to harvest fisher and marten. I mean, I know people are successful with it, but the very thing that was hurting them, you were making it harder to catch. Anyway, that's how my brain works. Jason, it's been a pleasure, man. I booked you for a half an hour, and like I told John in December, I can talk about this stuff for days. I love it, and I'm passionate about it, and I think it needs its voice. I think it needs more voices like you, and hopefully some of the the air finger quote influencers in the hunting and fishing space, where they start. I love the connection you made at the beginning. I never even thought of it as far as these fur bans go and how that affects the fishing community. Hopefully some people will start taking their cameras out and putting some trapping on their television shows, because I think the trend is right now to be more self-sufficient, having power and self reliancy, and trapping can be a big part of your locavore home garden movement and being self-sustaining, especially in an uncertain world.
That is a great point. We've been, I've helped out when I was in Tennessee. John and I had worked a lot with the Tennessee Fur Harvesters Association on putting on a trapping workshop. They did a couple of them each year, and it was a 3-day event. Kind of the first evening, actually the whole weekend, I guess. I would just go around talking to the different people that come, and I'm always trying to pick their brains. My wife's a marketing person for the National Deer Association, and she's been in the conservation game for quite a while doing all that, and I've learned so much. And so I try to engage these people and find out, well, why did you come here? Especially young ladies, because that's out of the norm. General, the outdoor sports or outdoor activities like this are something that's dominated by men. But whenever I see a group of ladies there all by themselves with no husband, no boyfriend, nothing like that, it's really intriguing. So I always like to ask, okay, what brought you here today? And very rarely does fur even enter into the equation. It's protecting their turkey, protecting their deer. I met a couple young ladies. They were in it just simply because they said, if the world falls apart, we want to know how to be able to capture and do this stuff. Some others were interested in protecting their chickens. The fur is really, and it hasn't been for some time, really a determining factor in a lot of this. I mean, people really want to know how to do it just to protect themselves, just to be able to do it if they have to. And it is becoming a lost art, especially as fewer and fewer people are doing it. Might be part of it because it's so much work. A lot of it is because people just have less and less land, especially around these urban areas. But it's just a huge thing. People are getting interested for non-fur reasons. I'd say the majority of people coming into it now are.
When you think about those scenarios, those survival type scenarios, and people have their bug out bags or their survival kits, there is a, how am I trying to say this? I'm not gonna be hyperbolic and say it's the most valuable piece in your equipment, but if it got to that point, if the world, went crazy and the lights went out and you need to source food, and if you're going out there and actively hunting, burning calories and just putting in this great effort, a couple 110 conibears that you can set by your hand are great passive tools to just set on a bunny trail or a squirrel trail or whatever and passively hunt, leave it, tie it off with some metal cable. Easy. Couple snares in there. Easy. Doesn't take up room in your pack. Very lightweight, and holy smokes, the yields can be great. And what better way to figure out how to use a 110 or a cable snare than going out with your trappers or going to furtakersofamerica.com and checking that out. Jason, it's been a pleasure, man. Thanks so much. Now we're almost at an hour.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. It is something you can just go on and on about.
Yeah. Well, look, hey, I appreciate you talking about NASC and the value of that too. For anybody that's in the lawmaking space that's listening as well, join us in November. We're going to do it before the holidays in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Hopefully we'll see you there. Talk about trapping nutria.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about a conservation success story.
Oh, man.
One of the big reasons for trapping. I mean, look at the Chesapeake and all the damage nutria cause. No way you're taking them out without trapping.
That's exactly right. Appreciate you, brother. Thanks so much for all you do.
Anytime. Thank you, Fred.
You bet. Thank you to John. Thank you to Jason for coming on. John, obviously back at NASC a few months ago, but the information's still relevant, and just thoroughly enjoyed Jason. Had a good time with both of them at NASC. There was a trap line demonstration that was one of the outings that we had there in Delaware. I went and did some land sets where a couple big red fox were taken, and part of the management on that particular farm, as well as some water sets for beaver, which we also were able to show the folks there on the ground how those trap sets work, and then the efficiency of those 330 conibears for very large beaver. So it was a pretty neat field trip overall, and it was good for some of the folks to get out there and check that out. And we thank Trappers Association and Fur Takers for setting that up. I hope you guys found that informational. If you've never trapped, if you've been curious about it, just have general questions, this is a great resource, as I said, and I would encourage you to share this, especially those of you that are elected officials and this stuff pops up, because it does. I don't think it matters what state you're in. This isn't an East Coast, West Coast deal, although it's well highlighted on those in that part of the country here and then over in the West. But Colorado, the Rockies, and definitely all over. I just said it, all over. Trapping, to Jason's point, it's low hanging fruit, and where these large coordinated national efforts can drop a bunch of cash, they will work in every state, death by 1,000 cuts, and starting with the trapping community and working through that to get to their bigger goal of preservation and outlawing hunting, fishing, and trapping altogether. And you anglers, you're not immune to this either. They would very much like to see you stop your activities altogether and letting the fishes of the world just swim about unencumbered. Anyway, important information here, and the hunting community especially needs to support their in-state trappers for the reasons I just said. Because once that domino falls, they're coming for you next. They'll come for the houndsman. Where you have bear hunting, they'll come for that. These big charismatic fur bears. And then they're going to come for your whitetail. They're going to come for your pheasants. All of it. It's just how this goes. So that's why it's vitally important to be organized in your states, making contact with your representatives in your town, your state senators, knowing who they are, and engaging with them, and just say, hey, did you know? Folks in Rhode Island, these cookie cutter fur bands come up. You can pass information like this on to those legislators, to those co-sponsors. So many of them just don't know. They think this is an easy bill to get behind because, why wouldn't you want to stop, what's in their mind of this meme of trapping once they've been sold a false storyline of suffering animals and torture and, continue to fill in the cliche blanks where we know all of that is not true. We know it. They need to know it. And this is where, as lawmakers, you could take this information and digest it. This is where our sporting community listening to this can take this information and pass it along and show support to the trappers in your state. So, soapbox engaged, disembarking from my soapbox. Thanks again for taking us along your day. We really do appreciate it. Some sessions are fast approaching the end. here in the handful of weeks. So where you can take action, and then enjoy some late spring and some summer, because they'll be coming back in the fall, and we'll be ready. As always, until we see you next time, take care of each other, be good. We'll see you then. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.